Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. As Bai Xiaochun stood there hesitating, the 10 spears stabbed through Gongsun Wan'er over and over again. Blood sprayed everywhere, and she seemed to be hovering on the brink of exploding completely. Her screams grew more intense, and powerful fluctuations began to roll off of her. Everyone in the crowd seemed very worked up by what was happening. Die, Bai Xiaochun, Mistress Red Dust growled through gritted teeth. Then she bit her tongue and spit out a mouthful of blood. Performing an incantation gesture, she waved her finger and sent the 10 spears whizzing forward with increased speed, to the point where they burst into flames. The blood-colored spears shot toward Gongsun Wan'er, who was teetering on the verge of collapse, and then suddenly exploded, releasing a terrifyingly destructive force right onto her. As everyone watched, Gongsun Wan'er's body collapsed into pieces. The force of the explosion was so intense that not even Mistress Red Dust was able to control it fully. Everything in the area was destroyed, and all of the giant Ghost Legion soul cultivators were sent tumbling away. Many of them were even coughing up blood. Bai Xiaochun wasn't affected very much, but he didn't want to stand out, so he screamed miserably and sent himself tumbling backward before staggering to a stop. However, deep in his eyes, a complicated expression could be seen that was a mixture of pleasure and concern. Looking over at the area where Gongsun Wan'er had fallen to pieces, he murmured, "Is she really dead?" It couldn't have been that simple. His heart pounded with suspicion as exclamations of joy rose up around him. As for Mistress Red Dust, her face was pale white, but she forced a smile onto it. Then she took a breath, and was about to go inspect the dead Bai Xiaochun, when suddenly her face fell, and she backed up. Without any warning, an intense beam of blood-red light erupted up into the air from the spot where Gongsun Wan'er had collapsed. It was a vicious, abominable light, accompanied by a terrifying aura that seemed to pulse with rage. The sky was stained red, making the entire world seem like a vile ocean of blood. Mistress Red Dust had reacted a moment too late, and was affected by the beam of light, causing her to tremble as blood sprayed out of her mouth. As shouts of alarm filled the air, Bai Xiaochun's eyes widened to the point where they seemed like they might pop out of his head. Earlier, he had been pretending to be staggering around, but now he really could hardly stand up. Screaming, he fell backward, his heart pounding as he tried to get his mask to make it seem like he was dead. As Bai Xiaochun tried to fake his death, the blood-red beam of light began to contract. In the blink of an eye, it became a shadowy, blood-colored figure standing right on the spot where Gongsun Wan'er had fallen to pieces. Then, that figure pounced on a nearby giant Ghost Legion cultivator with speed that vastly surpassed anything which had been on display before. As the light stabbed through the soul cultivator, he shivered, and his hair turned white. Then his teeth began to fall out, wrinkles filled his skin, and a moment later, he was nothing but a desiccated corpse. His soul, life force, cultivation base, and everything else that made him up had been absorbed by the blood-colored figure. And yet, that was only the beginning. The figure became a red streak of light that began to stab through one soul cultivator after another. Every cultivator it touched screamed before shriveling up into a corpse. Although all of this takes a bit of time to describe, it actually happened within the blink of an eye. In the shortest of moments, the blood-colored figure that was Gongsun Wan'er stabbed through numerous soul cultivators. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, little more than a red streak was visible, which was almost like an embroidery thread that stabbed through countless soul cultivators, seemingly linking them together. Bai Xiaochun lay on the ground pretending to be dead, but he could see everything clearly, and his scalp was tingling so hard it felt like it might explode. Any mixed emotions he had felt because of the possible death of Gongsun Wan'er earlier had now completely vanished. "She can't see me. She can't see me. I'm already dead." That was what he kept muttering to himself as he tried to get the mask to keep up his facade of death. By now, it was very obvious that Gongsun Wan'er was not someone that Mistress Red Dust could fight. Dead, only a few people are left of nearly 10,000. The rest were killed in an instant. "I told you people, you should have listened to me." Bai Xiaochun was so nervous he almost couldn't take it. The sight of Gongsun Wan'er killing so many people had him trembling inwardly, filled with a sensation of deadly crisis to the point where he simply lay there trying not to move, hoping that Gongsun Wan'er wouldn't notice him. Perhaps it was because of the mask, or perhaps it was his excellent acting skills, but either way, the red streak that was Gongsun Wan'er didn't pay any attention to him. Nor did she pay any attention to the handful of people who had been injured earlier and were lying motionless on the ground. Eventually, the red streak of light shot back up into the air, where it formed back into the image of Bai Xiaochun. However, by this point, the fluctuations emanating out were no longer that of the nascent soul stage, but rather, those of a diva. The sky went dim, and winds screamed. Half of the sky was now magenta, and was trying to consume the other half of the sky, which was blood red. Of course, the entire sky had once been in the control of Mistress Red Dust's will, but now, that control was being wrested away. Bai Xiaochun, Mistress Red Dust cried, trembling visibly. The fact that her mind was being driven out of heaven and earth caused a backlash that sent blood spraying out of her mouth. Her eyes shone with murderous light. It wasn't that she didn't want to save the men under her command, she was just too slow. Furthermore, the attack she had just sustained from the red beam of light had completely destabilized her own chi and blood. She barely had time to wrest herself under control, let alone go save anyone else. When Bai Xiaochun heard Mistress Red Dust yelling his own name, he sighed bitterly inside at how unfair it was that he was being made the scapegoat. I have to get out of here, he thought, his heart pounding. Fudge, I'm gonna enhance my nascent soul immediately and get into the late nascent soul stage. That way I can keep my poor little life out of danger. Although the fact that Gongsun Wanner had shown up wasn't necessarily a good thing for him, there were at least some benefits to be had. For example, if he enhanced his nascent soul, then few people would suspect his true identity. After all, they already had their sights set on someone they believed to be him. Well, there's no use fantasizing about what will happen. First things first. I have to figure out a way to escape. Unfortunately, he was currently surrounded by corpses, which meant that if he moved, he would stick out more than ever. He could only try to keep up his act of being dead, and hope that things ended soon. Once Gongsun Wanner left, he would probably be able to flee. Or perhaps some other circumstances would arise that would give him a chance to make an escape. Even as Bai Xiaochun stewed in his anxiety, Gongsun Wanner looked up and smiled broadly at the shivering Mistress Red Dust. My profound thanks. I'm finally feeling a bit sated. If I eat a few more of you, then I'll finally be full. With that, she blurred into motion toward Mistress Red Dust. She didn't move quite as quickly as she had when she was a red streak of light, but she still moved with lightning-like speed. As she closed in, Mistress Red Dust performed a double-handed incantation gesture, causing her red lotus to swirl around her. However, the mere wave of Gongsun Wanner's hand caused blood to spray out of Mistress Red Dust's mouth, and she was shoved backward several dozen meters. You've lost a lot of blood, Gongsun Wanner said. That's not good. If I eat you now, you won't taste very good. As Gongsun Wanner's voice drifted eerily across the battlefield, Bai Xiaochun lay there looking at her out of the corner of his eye, his heart gripped with coldness. Mistress Red Dust wasn't a match for Gongsun Wanner at all. Booms rang out one after another as she was shoved backward again and again, blood spraying out of her mouth constantly until she was in very bad shape. The magical item that was her red lotus was shattered by Gongsun Wanner and eventually turned into ash. Mistress Red Dust was now pale-faced and teetering back and forth. By now, it looked like she wanted to flee, and yet it was obvious that Gongsun Wanner was so fast that escape was impossible. It was clearly a moment of grave crisis, and yet Bai Xiaochun understood that if he revealed himself now, it wouldn't do any good. Not only would he fail to save Mistress Red Dust, but he would also most likely end up perishing. However, it was very troubling to see Mistress Red Dust continuously shoved backward by Gongsun Wanner's attacks. Mistress Red Dust was clearly getting weaker and weaker, and was hovering on the brink of death. As Bai Xiaochun struggled over what to do, Gongsun Wanner continued to get closer to Mistress Red Dust, and was just about to launch another attack when she suddenly stopped in place. Then, her eyes glittered as she shot backward. Even as she did, the weakened and suppressed Mistress Red Dust suddenly looked up. Her beautiful features were ashen, but her eyes glittered with something dark, sinister, and icy cold. You finally got close enough, Mistress Red Dust said. Then, her arms shot out to either side as two images appeared, one in each pupil. They were images that depicted, not a person, but a city. It was a city that was every bit a match for Giant Ghost City in terms of size and splendor. It was perfectly constructed, with 4 towering walls and, if one looked close enough, countless bustling residents. Red Dust, Mistress Red Dust said. As soon as the words left her lips, rumbling filled the sky, and a shocking energy erupted from her eyes. At the same time, the air beneath Gongsun Wanner's feet suddenly began to transform. An illusory, hand-sized city appeared which was an exact copy of the cities within Mistress Red Dust's eyes. Out of the city shot numerous illusory iron chains, which instantly wrapped around Gongsun Wanner. Gongsun Wanner's face fell as she realized that she was locked in place and couldn't even struggle. Then, the city began to drop down to the ground, dragging her and the chains with it. As she descended, she began to shrink. From the look of it, she would soon become so small that she would actually fit inside the city, and then be eternally sealed inside of it. This magical technique was Mistress Red Dust's trump card. However, what had been unleashed so far was only half of the trump card. There was still more to come before its true power would be fully manifest. This trump card was vastly more terrifying than the magical blood from earlier, and also came at great cost to Mistress Red Dust. She had to waste a significant amount of longevity to power it, plus, she was using it after having been significantly injured. Blood sprayed out of her mouth as she seemed to weaken further. She almost couldn't breathe, and even staggered backward. Biting down on her tongue to try to remain conscious, her hands flashed with a double-handed incantation gesture as she prepared to complete the technique. As for Bai Xiaochun, he lay there, transfixed by the sudden shift in the tide of battle. In that moment, though, Gongsun Wanner, who was continuing to shrink as she dropped toward the city, suddenly smiled. A giant ghost secret magic. Nice. Red Dust Violet Road. Going all out, I see. Well, that's good. Let's see if you have enough life left in you to finish unleashing it. Even as she spoke, she raised her hand into the air. As she did, her index finger turned pitch black, and she pointed it at Mistress Red Dust. 1. The lands quaked and the sky seethed as a huge black ring of light suddenly materialized around Mistress Red Dust. Instantly, Mistress Red Dust began to tremble, and life force began to pour out of her eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. It even came out of her pores, a white mist which began to surge toward the black ring. She could hardly breathe properly, and her face was as pale as death. She quickly performed an incantation gesture, sending a blast of red light out against the black ring, weakening it but not destroying it. Its gravitational force continued to tug at Mistress Red Dust, no matter how she struggled or attacked it. Apparently, she couldn't destroy it. The fact was that she was too heavily injured, and had reached her limit. It had been a huge drain to begin to use her trump card, dropping her longevity to the point where she was like a candle flickering in the wind. At this point, Mistress Red Dust smiled bitterly. She knew that she had been careless, and had believed that, despite heading directly into a trap, the addition of over 10,000 soldiers from the giant Ghost Legion would give her the advantage. Never could she have imagined that the deaths of those soldiers would actually give her opponent even more deadly power. Before consuming all of the giant Ghost Legion soldiers, Gongsun Wanner had possessed a nascent soul cultivation base. Afterward, though, she rose to the diva level, making her strong enough to not only defeat Mistress Red Dust, but prevent her from even fleeing. Upon coming to this place, there was no way Mistress Red Dust could have ever predicted that it would be where she died. She had hoped to rely on her Red Dust Violet Road technique to at least seal her opponent, even if she herself died in the process. And yet, so far, she had only been able to use part of it. The gravitational force exerted by the black ring of light was too strong, and was sucking away her life force without any signs of slowing down. In fact, her hair was already white, and her skin covered with wrinkles. Right now, she actually looked like an old woman. Her life force, her soul, her cultivation base, everything about her was now being taken away. Her vision began to grow dim, and she began to gasp for breath. She couldn't bear to give in, and yet, had no options at her disposal. She had only been able to unleash half of her trump card. Am I really going to die like this? She murmured to herself. Her eyelids began to grow heavy, and she knew that it would only be moments before she couldn't keep them open. Gongsun Wanner was continuing to shrink down, and yet, her bizarre chuckling still filled the air. Other than that, silence filled the air. There were only a few dozen people still left alive, and all of them were sinking into despair. However, from Bai Xiaochun's unsteady breathing, it was possible to tell how conflicted he was. As his eyes remained fixed on the image of Mistress Red Dust turning old and decrepit, he made his decision. Whether it was for her or for himself, he knew that he couldn't just lay there faking death any longer. Even if it ended up exposing his true identity, he had to do something. If he didn't, Mistress Red Dust would die, and Gongsun Wanner would be released, after which she would surely slaughter any remaining survivors. Damn it, damn it, damn it, he thought, his eyes turning bloodshot. Suddenly, he leapt to his feet, shouting at the top of his lungs, blue veins bulging out on his face and neck as he shot toward the shrinking Gongsun Wanner with all the speed he could muster. His hand clenched into a fist, around which appeared a black vortex. He drew upon all of his fleshly body power and all of his life force, causing a figure to appear behind him, a figure wearing imperial robes and an imperial crown, a a figure that seemed like a paragon entity in all heaven and earth. A domineering aura erupted around him as he howled, accelerating madly until he was right on top of the black ring of light that had Mistress Red Dust trapped. There, he unleashed his fist strike. This was none other than the Undying Emperor's fist. It contained double his normal amount of fleshly body power, a mad level of strength that caused the entire area to tremble and send the clouds above churning. Dirt and pebbles began to rise into the air off the ground as a huge vortex formed. The shadowy emperor behind Bai Xiaochun, and the fist strike that was being unleashed, caused a domineering will to fill the area. As of this moment, there was now a third will present. Be destroyed. Boom. Gongsun Wanner's face fell as an enormous booming sound exploded out. The black ring of light surrounding Mistress Red Dust had already been weakened, so when Bai Xiaochun unleashed a diva-level fist strike against it, it immediately crumbled into pieces and collapsed. All of the life force it had absorbed from Mistress Red Dust was released. In the blink of an eye, much of it returned to her, with another large portion entering Bai Xiaochun. Because of that, Bai Xiaochun's undying bones immediately broke through all the way to the third stratum of the powered bones. Mistress Red Dust's hair returned to its previous black color, and the wrinkles vanished from her skin. She was beautiful again, and her eyes flickered with the excitement of having passed through a life or death struggle. Without any hesitation, she threw her arms out and performed incantation gestures, then pointed at the tiny city down on the ground. Violet Road. 1. A quick reminder that Mistress Red Dust's name comes from a line of poetry that literally reads, Violet Road Red Dust, and refers to the scenery along the road leading to the capital city of China. In this case, the order of the characters is reversed to read Red Dust Violet Road. Also, her given name Zemo uses those two characters for Violet Road. Blood sprayed out of Mistress Red Dust's mouth as her finger dropped. Then, unable to maintain control of her mind and body, she lapsed into unconsciousness. Red Dust Violet Road. Even Mistress Red Dust could only utilize this technique by overdrawing on her diva cultivation base and also draining her longevity. As the final words left her mouth, and she was beginning to collapse, red light shot out from her finger, becoming a red smoke that instantly enveloped Gongsun Wanner. Gongsun Wanner shrank down and down, dragged by the chains until she was inside of the tiny city. To any observer, that city would be the size of a hand, but to Gongsun Wanner, it now looked like any ordinary city. In fact, as she looked, a horse cart sped by, sending dust roiling up to cover everything in sight. This was none other than Red Dust Violet Road. It was a city that was both illusory and corporeal, and was in reality a shocking sealing magic. Anyone sealed in that city would be locked inside of an illusion from which they could not escape. In fact, even if they managed to break free from the city, they wouldn't find themselves free, but rather, outside of the city in another world. As the dust from the passing horse cart filled Gongsun Wanner's vision, she calmly looked up into the sky at the gigantic forms of Bai Xiaochun and Mistress Red Dust. Then she smiled. Despite the fact that Bai Xiaochun had been protected by his mask, when he had attacked just now, she had sensed his true aura. Sweetie, she said with an odd smile. Then she began to chuckle, the sound of which floated out of the city to fill the area. The sound of the chuckling filled Bai Xiaochun's heart with dread. Obviously, even the powerful sealing magic at work could not contain Gongsun Wanner for very long. Furthermore, with his own current battle prowess, he was obviously nowhere near a match for her. Therefore, it was without the slightest hesitation that he picked Mistress Red Dust up into his arms and shot away with blinding speed. As he disappeared, Gongsun Wanner was back in the tiny city, about to be covered over by dust. And yet, she was still chuckling. As she did, she extended her right hand, performed an incantation gesture, and waved her finger. In response, the burly Lei Shan, who had remained unmoving at the bottom of the nearby crater this entire time, suddenly opened his eyes, which were expressionless and dark. Then, he rose to his feet. Rumbling sounds could be heard as he flew up into the air, the massive wound in his chest rapidly healing. Then, he looked in the direction of the fleeing Bai Xiaochun, his face expressionless. Bring him back to me, Gongsun Wanner said from within the city, even as the dust settled down onto her. At that point, with her voice still echoing out into the world, it was for the first time that her eyes turned blank. She was now completely immersed within the sealing of the Red Dust Violet Road technique. Outside of the city, Lei Shan's eyes flickered with dark light as he unhesitatingly drew upon all the power he could muster to shoot after Bai Xiaochun with lightning-like speed. A piercing whistling sound filled the air as he flew along, and the air around him even distorted. Several thousand kilometers ahead of him, Bai Xiaochun gasped for breath as he sped along, carrying the unconscious Mistress Red Dust on his back. After images spread out behind him as he pierced through the air. At one point, he pulled out a transmission jade slip and tried to send a message to the giant ghost king. However, the entire area was still locked down by some unknown technique employed by Gongsun Wanner. Even as he huffed and puffed, he could feel Mistress Red Dust's lithe, supple body suddenly turn stiff. At that point, he realized that she had regained consciousness. When Mistress Red Dust awoke to find herself laying on Bai Xiaochun's back, it felt very strange. Struggling a bit to speak, she said, "Put me down. I don't need your help." "Shut up," he said angrily. "This is all your fault. I told you I had a bad feeling. Don't waste my time, woman. You don't need my help? Can you even stand on your own?" With that, he reached back and spanked her on the rear end. In his dismay and anxiety, the feeling of his hand bouncing off of her caused a strange heat to rise up inside of him. "You," Zhou Zimo spat. Considering how weak and anxious she was, the fact that Bai Xiaochun had berated her and then struck her rear end caused anger to burn in her heart. However, she was so weak that she could barely breathe, so the spike of emotion actually caused her to pass out again, whereupon she lay motionless on his back. HMPH. If it weren't for the sake of my old pal Giant Ghost, do you really think I would have saved you? You're always looking at me like you want to kill me, you know. What, do I owe you money or something? With another cold snort, he ignored Mistress Red Dust and focused on speeding along as quickly as possible. By this point, he had already detected Lei Shan following him a few thousand kilometers back. Bai Xiaochun had mixed feelings about Lei Shan. He knew that he was obviously dead, and had been transformed into something like his own corpse troopers. And corpse troopers were virtually impossible to kill. Unless one was vastly more powerful than a corpse trooper, and could literally rip it to pieces and transform it to ash, it would be impossible to wipe out. Lei Shan, we tangled once when you were alive. Now, even after you're dead, you still want to keep at it. I guess my only option is to pick up some extra speed. Sighing, he slapped his bag of holding to produce a heavenly airship, and then began to head in the direction of Giant Ghost City. As soon as he leapt onto the deck, he tossed Mistress Red Dust off to the side and then poured all his cultivation base power into the airship. It immediately began to glow with bright light, and then shot forward with speed that vastly surpassed the speed he himself was capable of. However, even as Bai Xiaochun accelerated, Lei Shan threw his head back and let out a shocking howl. Suddenly, he burst into flames, and then picked up speed at an alarming rate. In the blink of an eye, he was moving far faster than the heavenly airship, a bright beam of light that bore down right onto Bai Xiaochun. With every moment that passed, he got closer. 1,000 kilometers, 750 kilometers, 500 kilometers, 250 kilometers. In a flash, he was only about 50 kilometers away. The sight caused Bai Xiaochun's eyes to turn as wide as saucers. Gulping, he muttered, "What kind of medicine did this guy take? I can't believe he's so fast." Even as Bai Xiaochun's nervousness mounted, Mistress Red Dust woke up again and looked over at him with mixed emotions in her eyes. Then she noticed Lei Shan closing in on them, whereupon her eyes shone with decisive light. "Get this heavenly airship going faster, Bai Hao. With enough speed, you won't have to worry at all about that puppet." "Shut the hell up, would you?" Bai Xiaochun shouted back in frustration. Mistress Red Dust's bossy tone was really getting on his nerves. At this point, he was the one who had saved her, and yet she still dared to toss around orders like she was in charge. It left him feeling far from pleased. "You," she said, glaring daggers. By this point, she had actually realized that her tone of voice wasn't completely appropriate, and yet considering how proud she was, there was no way she would admit it openly. Before she could say anything else, Lei Shan burst forward with another flash of speed, putting him right above the airship. There, he shoved his right hand down. Instantly, a massive force erupted out from him, becoming a blast of wind that descended onto the airship. "Screw the hell off," Bai Xiaochun shouted. By now, his veins of steel were pulsing, and his murderous aura seethed. Clenching his right hand into a fist, he leapt up into the air and punched. Rumbling sounds spread out that could shake heaven and earth. The wind attack collapsed, and Bai Xiaochun, who hadn't even slowed down a bit, continued onward toward Lei Shan. As for Lei Shan, his eyes flickered with black light as he shot downward, slicing his hand in a deadly attack toward Bai Xiaochun. When they made contact, a massive boom rippled out that almost tore the sky open. Then, Bai Xiaochun's face fell as the force of the blow sent him plummeting back down onto the deck of the heavenly airship, which shuddered violently. Aura flickering unstably, Bai Xiaochun looked up to find that he had only shoved Lei Shan back upward a few paces. Not pausing for a second, he shot back toward Lei Shan, whereupon the two began to fight back and forth fiercely. As they did, the heavenly airship continued to shoot along at top speed until it was a good distance away. At that point, Mistress Red Dust struggled up to take the helm, whereupon she slowed the airship to a stop. The way she gasped from the effort made it obvious how weak she was. Turning, she looked back nervously at Bai Xiaochun and Lei Shan fighting in midair. Rumbling booms echoed out constantly through the sky as Lei Shan relied, not on magical techniques, but only on his fleshly body. However, that alone made him an opponent the likes of which Bai Xiaochun had never faced. Diva-level fleshly body, huh? Bai Xiaochun's murderous aura grew stronger as he was shoved backward by attack after attack. None of the blows he landed on Lei Shan seemed to have any effect, and yet every blow he sustained was shockingly damaging. This Lei Shan has some really uncanny power. I can't keep this up. I have to end things quickly. Even if I can't kill him, I at least need to slow him down. He was mostly worried that if things went on too long, Gongsun Wanner would break free, and that any advantage he had built up would disintegrate. At that point, he would almost surely die. His eyes were completely bloodshot as he contemplated whether or not to reveal who he was. After all, it wouldn't make any sense to lose his poor little life just to keep his identity secret. Furthermore, Gongsun Wanner still looked like him. Therefore, anything he did to reveal his true identity wouldn't cause any problems immediately. Having reached this point in his train of thought, he threw his head back and roared, performing a double-handed incantation gesture that was unlike anything he usually did. Immediately, the splendor of his heaven-down nascent soul sent spiritual power coursing through his body, nearly an ocean of if that then spilled out into the open. That spiritual power immediately transformed into frigid coldness. Cracking sounds rang out in all directions as the area around Bai Xiaochun froze over. The entire area instantly became like a frozen lake. This was none other than the frigid school will evolving incantation. Bai Xiaochun had never dared to use this divine ability, not even with the power of his mask to disguise what it was. But now, madness flickered in his eyes as frigid qi poured out around him. Then, he extended his right hand and pointed at Lei Shan, who was already being slowed down because of the frigid coldness. Seal! Bai Xiaochun shouted. All of the frigid qi in the area exploded into motion toward Lei Shan. It took only a moment to completely inundate him, covering him with frost so rapidly that, a moment later, he was completely covered with a layer of sealing ice. More cracking sounds rang out over the course of the following few breaths of time. Soon, Lei Shan was covered with multiple layers of ice. Although he struggled, with each layer that he damaged, more layers piled on top, until he was like an enormous ice statue. He was a huge chunk of ice hovering in midair, hundreds of meters tall, completely unmoving. Of course, closer inspection would reveal many cracks filling the ice. Clearly, the sealing would only last for a short time. Although Mistress Red Dust was shocked by what she was seeing, the technique didn't actually make her think of Bai Xiaochun. As for Bai Xiaochun, he threw his head back and roared in shocking fashion as his fleshly body power spiked dramatically. Intense fluctuations rolled out in all directions, along with shocking energy. Everything in the area shook violently, and small pebbles began to rise up into the air. Even some enormous rocks began to float up into the air. Fissures appeared on some nearby low-lying mountains, and they began to collapse into rubble, which also floated up into the air. Moments later, large boulders began to rise up, almost as if Bai Xiaochun's body had become a black hole dragging everything toward him. Rumble. In the blink of an eye, the rocks began to form up around Bai Xiaochun, layer upon layer. A 300-meter-tall giant appeared, right there in the middle of the wildlands. This was none other than the living mountain incantation. Bai Xiaochun hadn't dared to use this technique in the wildlands up to this point. But now was not the time to worry about such things. Fueling it with the power of his cultivation base, he grew larger and larger until he was not 300 meters tall, but rather, more than 2,100 meters tall. Although he currently wasn't powerful enough to literally shake all of heaven and earth, he certainly came close to that level. His fleshly body power combined with the living mountain incantation put him at his very peak. Since he was currently incapable of unleashing the undying Emperor's fist, he needed to close some of the gap between his own level and Lei Shan's, and this was the only way. Get ready to die, he shouted through the mouth of the gigantic stone golem. With that, he lunged forward to bash at the sealed Lei Shan. This was none other than the mountain-shaking bash. Bai Xiaochun couldn't bother to conceal the effects of the mountain-shaking bash. He unleashed all of the explosive power he was capable of, becoming something like a stone beast that lunged forward with astonishing madness. Meanwhile, the cracks in the ice had grown more plentiful. Even as Bai Xiaochun closed in, the ice suddenly exploded. Lei Shan burst out into the open right as Bai Xiaochun arrived, incarnated as the stone golem giant from the Living Mountain incantation. The moment of collision caused a boom that shook everything in the area. The heavenly bodies went dim, and doughty Lei Shan was flung backward violently, leaving loud cracking sounds echoing behind him. However, things weren't over yet. Relying on the power of the Living Mountain incantation and the divine ability of the mountain-shaking bash, Bai Xiaochun continued forward, reaching out with his thumb and index finger. As he did, black light appeared, and he pinched his fingers together in the direction of Lei Shan's throat. This was none other than the throat-crushing grasp. Although all of this takes a bit of time to describe, it actually happened in the briefest of moments. Starting with the frigid school will evolving incantation, he had quickly and smoothly unleashed a whole series of techniques. And now, as the throat-crushing grasp bore down onto Lei Shan, he howled and threw his hands out in front of him to block the thumb and index finger of the stone golem that was Bai Xiaochun. Cracking sounds rang out from inside of Lei Shan, and the black light in his eyes grew stronger. Even as he fought back, Bai Xiaochun went all out to unleash the power of the throat-crushing grasp. Then, he unhesitatingly jerked his hand to the side, sending Lei Shan flying down toward the ground, where he slammed into the dirt and opened up a huge crater. Before Lei Shan could react, Bai Xiaochun dropped down and delivered 10 fist strikes in quick succession. The ground quaked as fissures and crevices snaked out from within the crater. At that point, another shocking howl erupted out from within the crater as Lei Shan blocked Bai Xiaochun's final fist strike. The backlash sent Bai Xiaochun's fist swinging backward, and yet, Lei Shan was now covered in wounds, his hair in disarray and black blood seeping out all over his body. However, the black light in his eyes caused his fleshly body power to rocket once again to new heights. Even as he prepared to leap up into the air, a mark suddenly appeared on the forehead of Bai Xiaochun's stone golem form. Meanwhile, inside the golem, Bai Xiaochun's true self likewise had a mark on his forehead, which opened up into a third eye. The heaven-span Dharma eye. Instantly, the power of that third eye erupted out from the stone golem's forehead, and latched onto Lei Shan. Lei Shan shivered as an indescribable force enveloped him, taking control of his entire body. His pupils quivered as he was suddenly stuck in place in midair, unable to move. In that exact moment, Bai Xiaochun sent his stone golem form leaping up. A roar could be heard as he then reached out and slapped Lei Shan, sending him hurtling back toward the ground. As the blow landed, Bai Xiaochun unleashed his undying hex. The undying hex became countless black threads that flowed out from his palm and into Lei Shan. As Lei Shan slammed down into the crater below, Bai Xiaochun's stone golem form collapsed, sending numerous rocks and boulders falling down. Within the space of a few breaths of time, those rocks covered Lei Shan as surely as a mountain. Inside of the mountain, black threads swirled, completely locking Lei Shan in place. Having accomplished these things, Bai Xiaochun staggered backward a few paces before retreating to the heavenly airship. There, Mistress Red Dust stood, her mouth agape as Bai Xiaochun took control of the ship and sent it screaming through the air like some wild beast. As the heavenly airship sped through the air, Mistress Red Dust continued to glance over at Bai Xiaochun, her mood fluctuating unstably. Conflicting emotions appeared in her eyes as she thought back to the battle prowess and techniques he had just put on display. In the end, she decided not to say anything. Instead, she closed her eyes and focused on trying to recover as quickly as possible. She had received serious injuries and wouldn't be back to normal anytime soon. Although she could temporarily suppress the effects, that would only work for a short time before she experienced an intense backlash. As she sighed bitterly in her heart, Bai Xiaochun focused on piloting the heavenly airship. At one point, he suddenly looked over his shoulder in the direction of Lei Shan. That was when the sound of a shocking explosion could be heard. Everything behind the heavenly airship shook violently as a massive shockwave rolled out. Several thousand kilometers back, the mountain of boulders exploded out in all directions as the undying hex collapsed, and a tall, burly figure appeared. It was none other than Lei Shan. No expression could be seen on his face, but he was visibly injured, and seriously at that. Gaping holes could be seen all over him, some of which passed through his entire body. This time, although the wounds continuously healed themselves, it caused the black light in his eyes to begin to fade. And yet, that didn't stop him from flying up into the air to give chase. Impossible, Mistress Red Dust blurted in shock. All those divine abilities you used just now injured that corpse trooper even more than I did. How could he still be chasing us? Bai Xiaochun didn't say anything in response, but his expression turned grimmer. Inwardly, he already knew the answer to the question. It had everything to do with Gongsun Wanner herself. Although he wasn't sure of the exact details, he was convinced that it was the case. Gongsun Wanner probably isn't free yet, hopefully. However, he couldn't be sure. Eyes bloodshot from mounting anxiety, he released the helm of the heavenly airship, allowing it to slowly come to a stop. Then he turned and went to stand at the stern, where he looked out at Lei Shan, who was closing in on them from a distance of several hundred kilometers away. If I don't kill him, he thought, it's going to be hard to get away. The longer he continues to hound us like this, the more danger we'll be in. Calming his aura, he reached out with both hands. Eyes glowing, he drew on the power of his cultivation base and simultaneously said in his heart, water swamp. Instantly, mist began to roil out in all directions, covering the airship and spreading out to fill a 500-kilometer area. At the same time, because of how the airship had stopped moving, Lei Shan entered that very 500-kilometer area, and was within the world of mist. As he entered, Bai Xiaochun's eyes glittered with killing intent. Dropping his hands, he uttered the next word in his heart. Kingdom, Water Swamp Kingdom. As soon as the full technique was called upon, the entire 500-kilometer area became an enormous, watery swamp. At the same time, the howl of some beast could be heard, seemingly echoing from the distant past, filling the area with power that would be shocking to anyone who could hear it. Lei Shan's eyes flickered with black light as he suddenly stopped in place and prepared to back up. However, before he could, the howling of the beast grew more intense, and spikes like enormous mountain peaks began to rise up in the entire 500-kilometer area. Each and every spike contained mountain toppling, sea-draining power which filled the air with rumbling sounds as they sped madly toward Lei Shan. Lei Shan shivered violently, and all of the wounds which had been in the middle of recovery split open, causing black blood to spray out everywhere. He tried to fall back, but before he could, 5 curved spikes encircled him. Those 5 spikes looked like mountain peaks, and they were not arranged in a neat row, but rather, were staggered. Furthermore, as soon as the spikes shot up into the air, they were followed by what appeared to be an entire continent. If one looked carefully, it would be possible to see that it was the clawed hand of some enormous beast. The spikes that were the mountain peaks grew off of the clawed hand, and considering how big they were, one could only imagine how huge the hand was. Those so-called mountain peaks were actually the talons. As for the continent, it was actually the palm of the hand. Although it was clearly visible, it was only a portion of it. And despite the fact that Bai Xiaochun had already glimpsed his life essence spirit on numerous occasions, he was just as shaken this time as he always had been in the past. As of this moment, that enormous clawed hand seemed to surpass heaven and earth as it closed around Lei Shan. The events playing out virtually defied description. No matter how Lei Shan struggled, no matter how he tried to flee, he couldn't escape. He howled in defiance, and the black light in his eyes grew more intense. Black smoke even began to rise up off of him, which formed into the shape of a young girl's head, hovering above his own. That head let out a miserable shriek as the enormous beast hand slammed into Lei Shan. A deafening boom echoed out. The ground quaked violently, and then shattered into countless pieces. As for Bai Xiaochun, he coughed up a mouthful of blood and staggered backward. He had already used his undying Emperor's Fist to save Mistress Red Dust, and now he was using this divine ability. This combination had him completely and utterly drained and exhausted. The clawed hand faded away, leaving behind nothing but an enormous crater. It was hundreds of meters wide, and was devoid of mountains, of plants, of vegetation, of anything. It was completely shattered and empty, except for the corpse of Lei Shan. He was completely shattered. He lay there unmoving, his legs crushed, his head twisted oddly to the side, his body hardly recognizable as human. And yet, that black glow still flickered in his eyes. It was almost as if the blow Lei Shan had just received was stimulating to him, and actually caused him to recover faster. In the blink of an eye, he yet again flew up into the air. The black glow had clearly been reduced by almost half. Furthermore, his aura was greatly weakened compared to before. And yet, the fact that he was still in the fight caused Bai Xiaochun's heart to fill with despair. What kind of recovery power does he have? He thought, his eyes flickering with madness. Lei Shan could be beaten down relatively easily, but could not be killed. It was enough to leave anyone bristling with anger. Anyone, even a diva, who sustained such injuries would be teetering on the verge of being wiped out for good. And yet here Lei Shan was, rapidly recovering. Mistress Red Dust remained silently off to the side, looking at the rapidly recovering Lei Shan as he flew out of the crater. As of this point, she knew that he could not be killed, and that it would be difficult to escape him. Time was of the essence, and she wasn't sure how long the sealing effect of her red dust violet road would last. As soon as that person who bore the visage of Bai Xiaochun emerged, then Mistress Red Dust knew that she and Bai Hao would be killed beyond the shadow of a doubt. With such thoughts on her mind, she looked over at Bai Xiaochun. The divine abilities and magical techniques he had used, including the Water Swamp Kingdom, had caused the gears in her head to begin to turn. But now was not the time to ponder the issue deeply. As of this moment, both of their lives were on the line. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, then forced them to open again. When they did, they shone with the desire to do battle. Without any hesitation, she forcibly suppressed all of her injuries and leapt up into the air. Instantly, her diva cultivation base roared to life. All of a sudden, she seemed back to normal, like she was once again the Sergeant Major of the Giant Ghost Legion. Flicking her sleeve, she coolly said, "Get out of here, Bai Hao. The sealing effect limiting communications can only stretch for so far. You absolutely must report this matter to my father, the Giant Ghost King. And notify the Grand Heaven Master too. The person controlling this puppet has consumed vast amounts of life force and is clearly intent on bringing disaster to the wildlands." Not bothering to wait for a response from Bai Xiaochun, she flew off of the heavenly airship toward Lei Shan. A tremor passed through Bai Xiaochun. All of a sudden, a familiar feeling filled him. Watching Mistress Red Dust flying off made him feel like he was back in the Luokan Mountains, nothing more than a trifling qi condensation cultivator. A moment later, he spoke, his veins of steel audible in his voice as he said, "Give me the time it takes an incense stick to burn, Zhou Zimo. After that, I'll take care of everything." Instead of piloting the heavenly airship away, he quickly entered a private chamber below the main deck, set up a spell formation, and sat down cross-legged. Then, he took out his turtle walk. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.